work. It was pretty stressful for her. And she was also an only child just like Skylar, so the two of them really bonded over that. And Mary and Dave really wanted to be as welcoming as they could to Shelia. They would have her over all the time for dinners, playdates, all that stuff, as well as sleepovers. She was so used to coming to their house that she would just walk right in. And they were fine with that. Skylar's family lived in an apartment in Star City, West Virginia, which is a small town in Magnolia County. And Skylar really enjoyed playing with Shelia. She was definitely a fun person to hang out with. She was a bit of a wild child, and I think that was interesting to Skylar. And like I said, the girls went to different schools. But when they got into high school, Shelia ended up transferring to University High School, which is where Skylar went, and they were really excited. She really liked high school. She did really well in school, actually. Teachers really liked her. And she had high hopes one day of becoming a lawyer. She was a very responsible kid. She also had a job in high school, and she worked at a Wendy's where two of her other friends worked as well. At school, she was definitely known as a confident and popular girl. At this point, Sheila's parents got remarried, and she really liked her stepdad, and at that point, she was feeling more comfortable in her home life than ever before. Now Skylar and Shelia were spending a lot more time together, they were getting a lot closer, and they were thrilled to be in the same school. Eventually, Skylar and Shelia added a third person to their group. During their freshman year, they met Rachel Schoaf. Rachel's parents were divorced. She had an older half-brother that she didn't grow up with. So like Skylar and Shelia, she was raised as an only child. Before high school, Rachel went to a private Catholic school and she was pretty sheltered by a wealthy religious family. And people who know her said that she really seemed to like attention. She loved being in the school plays. And she wasn't just in the school plays, she was normally the star of the school plays. And the three of them were really close, and they spent all of their free time together. If they weren't actually physically together, they were texting, and they were actually really into Twitter as well, so they were constantly talking to each other. A lot of people said they acted more like sisters than friends. They were really that close. To a lot of people, it seemed like nothing could ever break their friendship apart. And Mary and Dave were really happy that Skylar had such close friends. Eventually over time, they started having some intergroup jealousy where one person would feel left out. Sometimes two would hang out, and the other person was alone or would be left alone. This was really starting to happen with Rachel and Shelia. They seemed to be a lot closer, and Skylar seemed to be left out and was often feeling alone. And by summer of 2012, Shelia and Rachel were really close, and Skylar definitely felt a little bit left out. And on July 4, 2012, Skylar was home alone because Rachel and Shelia had made plans and didn't invite her. Obviously, this was really upsetting. So that day she was moping around, feeling sad, feeling lonely, and feeling left out, and her mom felt really bad for her. Her mom has suggested that maybe she look at a book or do some homework. Skylar was a very, very smart student. She was an honor student. She absolutely loved to read. She really liked to read a lot of the classics. So her mom thought this is something that she would want to do to make the time go by. But not even that sounded fun to Skylar on that day. She just felt really down. And that day she actually tweeted out, "Sick of being at home. Thanks, friends. Love to hang out with you all too." So it was clear that Skylar was hurt by Shelia and Rachel making plans without her. So the next night, July 5, 2012, Skylar worked her shift at Wendy's until about 10 p.m. When she got home, her parents were in the living room just watching TV, having a very casual night. She walked in, took a peek at what they were watching, hung out for a second, and then gave them both a kiss goodnight and went up to bed. Skylar actually had some other plans. She decided that she was going to be sneaking out that night. At about 12:30 a.m. on Friday, July 6, Skylar snuck out of her house through her bedroom window. Skylar used a small bench on the ground underneath the window to help her climb out. She took a bunch of her regularly carried items with her, her purse, her cell phone, her wallet. And there's actually surveillance video of her leaving the apartment complex at 12:31 a.m. In the clip, she's walking through the parking lot across the street to where a car is waiting, and then she gets into the back seat, and they drive away. Now, sneaking out was something that Skylar had been doing more of lately. She had definitely started to rebel a little bit more. The three of them loved to go across the Pennsylvania border to Star City to smoke weed. They had just discovered that, and they'd also gotten really into drinking. They would often stay out past curfew. She was getting in trouble sometimes. And a lot of what they were concerned about was what was being posted on the internet. All three of the girls were very active on Twitter. Rachel and Skylar were big into Twitter, but honestly not as much as Shelia. She tweeted probably twice as much as both of them combined. She literally chronicled her every thought and feeling. Here's just a few examples of her tweets. I wish it were acceptable to be naked all the time. It's okay if you hate me, as long as I hated you first. Stepdad, stop walking around the house without a shirt. It's gross, not to mention your boobs are bigger than mine. There's a reason why sober and so bored sound almost exactly the same. If you talk about how you're madly in love with Justin Bieber, I'd probably want to stab you. All three girls were definitely rebelling, and Skylar's other friends outside of these two started to notice and did not like Shelia for this reason. They thought that she was a little too wild. She seemed to always be pushing the limits too far. Skylar's other friends thought that Shelia was a terrible influence on her. Her parents are noticing that Rachel's a bad influence, and her other friends are noticing that Sheila's a bad influence also. Skylar's friends said that they even felt like Skylar was being changed by the two of them, that her personality was being altered. And when her other friends tried to talk to her about it, she just dismissed it. She thought that they were totally out of line and that it wasn't true. Plus, her and Shelia had been friends since Skylar was a kid. She looked up to her like a sister almost, and Rachel was really close with Shelia too, and really liked her, and gravitated towards her energy because Rachel was definitely more of a rebel too. She was also a popular girl. She had a lot of other friends, but she really liked Shelia. And Rachel's other friends started to feel the exact same way that Skylar's other friends did, that Shelia was a bad influence on Rachel. They tried to talk to her, but Rachel did not care. She thought that Shelia was such a cool person, and nothing was going to stop her from being friends with her. In that year in school, there were some rumors spreading around that Rachel and Shelia actually were starting to have a relationship, that the two of them were hooking up. A lot of people thought that's why Rachel was so defensive of Shelia. She didn't want anyone to talk badly about her ever. But no one knew if this was actually true because Shelia and Rachel also had boyfriends. But the two of them did seem really close, and eventually, they just started to push Skylar away. They would make plans without her all the time. They would dress like each other to make her jealous, like purposely plan their outfits to make her feel left out. And all during sophomore year, Skylar and Shelia were fighting way more than usual, and it seemed like Rachel seemed to be what was really driving them apart. And Skylar, of course, vented her frustrations on Twitter. She said, "I tell the whole school all of the stuff I have on everyone, which is a lot. Too bad my friends are having lives without me. You are so two-faced and obviously stupid if you thought I wouldn't find out. Just know I know. Hope you don't expect me to care anymore. #bye." On the morning of July 6, Skylar snuck out at 12:30 a.m. That morning, Mary and Dave got ready for work like normal, and they assumed that Skylar was in her room. She said that she was going to bed early the night before. Dave had planned to go do his shift at Walmart, come back, and give Skylar his car so that she could take it to her shift at Wendy's. He got home midday as planned, and he went to Skylar's room. But when he got to her door, he realized that the door was locked, which was unusual. Sometimes Skylar locked her door for privacy, but it wasn't something she did very often and not normally in the middle of the day, but Dave didn't think too much of it. So he started knocking, calling for her. "Skylar, are you in there?" And she didn't answer. When he didn't hear anything, he instantly just got a wave of fear. It's one thing if you can tell your kids ignoring you or locking you out. You can hear a little sounds, a breath, something. But he heard absolutely nothing. He went outside of the house to the window so that he can look in. And when he got there, he saw the small bench on the ground from when Skylar had snuck out, and he saw that the window was open. So of course, any dad's going to put this together right away. Skylar clearly snuck out. But of course, since it's now the daytime, Dave starts freaking out immediately because he figures something could have happened to her if she did sneak out and she's still not back by now. Especially because her shift at Wendy's was coming up, and she's a very responsible girl. She's going to show up for her shift. The first thing he thinks of to do is call her friends and see if they know where she is. So he calls Shelia, and she said that she had talked to Skylar around midnight the night before, but she hadn't heard from her since. She also said she had no idea where she was and didn't even have an idea of where she could be. Dave contacted Mary, and Mary, of course, was concerned, but she also just told him to stay calm. "Let's just see if we can get a hold of her, figure this out. She's probably going to show up for her shift at Wendy's. She's not just going to miss work." Of course, Mary was still concerned and she came home. And when she did get home, they actually got a call from Wendy's saying that Skylar had not shown up for work. And at this point, they said the panic set in for both of them truly because they knew that she would not just miss work like this. She was too responsible, this is out of character for her, and the fact that she had snuck out the night before was just so concerning. They contacted the Star City Police to report Skylar missing. The two of them start panicking. They start contacting friends and relatives, alerting them about what is going on right away, trying to think of where Skylar possibly could have gone. And not too long into all of this panic, Shelia actually calls back, and this time she admitted she and Rachel picked up Skylar at 11 p.m., which we know isn't true because we saw that surveillance footage that showed 12:31 a.m. They said they hung out with her for like an hour, and then they dropped her off a little way down the street an hour later. Then right after that, Shelia and her mom ended up coming to the Neese's house to help look for Skylar right away. Shelia, Tara, and Mary went on one side of the street knocking on doors while Dave and the officer took the other side, and they asked everyone in the neighborhood if they had seen anything, if they had heard anything. Maybe, in the middle of the night, if they had any security cameras installed or inside that could have possibly picked something up. At this point, Dave and Mary and the police have not seen the surveillance footage of Skylar leaving at 12:31. which doesn't make sense with Sheila's story. But suddenly, Mary remembered that the apartment complex had just installed new cameras on the building, and they had to have been working. So they went to the landlord, and he took them into their office right away, and they started looking at the surveillance footage. They watched that footage of Skylar crossing the parking lot and getting into a vehicle. At this point, they have no idea who this vehicle belongs to. The footage is so grainy, they can't make out who's in it, and they thought the car actually was an SUV. As soon as the police see this surveillance footage, they think Skylar is a runaway, and that she's unhappy with her home, that she purposely left, and she's probably just out there somewhere. And her disappearance at this point did not qualify for an Amber Alert. At this point in time, all 4 of the following criteria has to be met before an Amber Alert could be issued. A child had to have believed to be abducted, the child is under 18, the child may be in danger of death or serious injury, and there is sufficient information to indicate that the Amber Alert would be helpful. Plus, when this was all going on, there was still a wait for 48 hours to file a missing persons report, which, in most places, that is not a thing anymore. That's not true. So Dave and Mary were trying their best to convince the police that Skylar would not just run away and not come back. Yes, she was sneaking out, but she loved her life. She was so close with her parents. She was a happy kid. This was not in her character to just leave and to stay gone. But of course, the police refused to listen to them. Mary and Dave really felt like they had to take matters into their own hands. They printed out flyers with her picture, her description, and what she was last seen wearing, and put them all up across the county wherever they could. Rachel and Sheila were devastated about Skylar being gone. They were very, very concerned. Sheila, according to Mary and Dave, seemed to be the most concerned. They said that she would call them often just asking for updates on the investigation, and over. Would say, "I wish I had some information. I wish I knew something. I wish I could help." Sheila was very cooperative. She asked to volunteer to search, to pass out flyers. She basically said whatever she could do, she was willing to do, just let her know. Mary and Dave felt like, wow. Skylar has a very good friend in Sheila. She cares about her a lot. Skylar had good friends in general. They're feeling the love because so many people just were so devastated about Skylar being missing, couldn't believe that she would ever run away, knew that something had to be wrong. One day, just a few days after Skylar had first gone missing, Sheila actually went up to Skylar's room, sat on her bed, and was just sobbing. Mary walked in, and they had a nice moment together. They hugged, and they were trying to support each other through all of this. So luckily on June 9, 2012, things start to get taken a little more seriously by law enforcement, the fact that Skylar is still not there. And after looking more into her background, they realized that this is really out of character for her. So luckily, the West Virginia State Police and the FBI joined the search, and FBI agent Morgan Spurlock and Star City police officer Jessica Colbank interviewed Sheila just days after Skylar was first reported missing. Now what's really interesting is as soon as the investigator did her first interview on Sheila, she instantly felt like something was wrong. Her first impression of Sheila was that she was a narcissist. Not only that, she also described her as wrong. On the other hand, Rachel had gone on a boating trip with her mother on July 6, the day that Skylar had gone missing. Her mother was on the trip along with her mom's friend, and they both noticed a really gnarly cut on her ankle and thought it was strange. And on the following day, on the 7th, Rachel actually had to go to church camp, so they had to interview her via phone. And when they talked to her, they said that she was just very nonchalant. She was relaxed, saying, "I don't really know where Skylar is," but she didn't seem as panicked as Shelia did. And she would also just say, "Shelia knows more than me. Talk to Shelia. I don't really know much." She just was short about it, but she did agree to come in for an in-person interview, which is obviously crucial, as soon as she was back from church camp. But when Rachel got home from church camp, she didn't just come in right away, which you'd think that this would be a high priority for her. The investigators actually had to track her down for that interview. It was not easy. And as soon as they brought her in, she said pretty much the exact same thing as she said on the phone, almost word for word at some points, and it started to seem really scripted because Sheila's story and Rachel's story were like exactly the same. So of course, investigators looked into as much as they could, social media, computers, even Skylar's journal to see if there were any clues. The last entry that Skylar had made in her journal was actually from a year before she went missing, and in it, she talked a lot about Shelia. She would talk about how Shelia could get away with anything and that Shelia got all the attention from the boys. And Skylar also seemed to be very fascinated with Shelia. She wrote in detail about Sheila's sex life. She seemed intrigued by it and almost living vicariously through her. And again, this is Sheila's sex life that she's writing about in her journal, and she's writing a lot about it, very detailed. And it even included information about Shelia hooking up with women as well. And one entry in the diary even talked about a time where the girls were having a sleepover at Rachel's house and they had broken into her mom's liquor cabinet. Skylar wrote in her journal all about this and also about how once they started drinking that Shelia and Rachel started hooking up. And in this entry, Skylar talks about how she was locked in the bathroom with the girls while they were making out and stuff. And she said that she had nothing against them being bisexual. She was very supportive, but she just felt uncomfortable being in the room with them while they were hooking up, which is very understandable. I feel like it's just weird to be in a room with anyone hooking up when you're just chilling there. And then 2 weeks later, Skylar made that tweet, "I tell the whole school all the stuff I have on everyone, which is a lot, #if I could get away with it." Investigators continued to search Skylar's social media, especially her Twitter, for more clues. And they saw that after her Wendy's shift on July 5th, she actually tweeted twice. One said, "You are doing stuff like this is why I will never completely trust you." And another that said, "All I do is hope." Meanwhile, Skylar went missing this summer between her sophomore and junior year. And of course, in a situation like this where no one knows what truly happened, and you're in a high school setting, rumors are going to spread like crazy, and they did. People started speculating that she ran away. Maybe she ran away even with a boyfriend. Maybe she was abducted by an online predator or brought into human trafficking. One of the rumors was that she robbed a bank, and so she was on the run. And honestly, the bank one has some merit to it because there was a bank in Blacksville that was robbed about a week before Skylar disappeared and again about 10 days later. The younger brother of one of the suspects had dated Shelia, so they thought there was some type of connection, and he was also a person of interest in Skylar's case. But Dave and Mary knew that Skylar definitely didn't run away. To them, they felt like there were only two possibilities: either she was gone, and Mary had a feeling pretty early on that Skylar was no longer with them. Dave definitely held out hope for a lot longer. But if that wasn't the case, they said the only other possibility that they considered was her being abducted and being held by someone. They knew that she wouldn't just run away, that she wouldn't be off living some new life. Not only that, Skylar left behind a ton of important items that if you were really running away, you probably would have taken. She had left her toothbrush, her hair straightener, her contact lenses, her cell phone charger. She even left her security blanket, which was her mother's old nightgown that she called Goody. And that thing meant absolutely everything to her, so there's no way she would have left without it. And out of all Skylar's friends, which she had many friends, and people were really upset over Skylar being gone, many kids in the high school were experiencing depression, anxiety, fear over what was going on, wondering where she was. It seemed that Shelia was one of the people, if not the person having the hardest time with it. She posted on Facebook, "Skylar, come back. I seriously cannot deal with school without you. I miss you too much." And Skylar's dad, Dave, actually responded to her and said, "She will be home soon. Love you," and Shelia said, "Love you, too." And after a while, it started to seem weird. And not only that, rumors at the school were kicking up that Rachel and Shelia had something to do with Skylar's disappearance. A rumor also spread that Skylar had overdosed and that maybe Rachel and Shelia had hidden her body because they were afraid. Maybe they thought it was their fault, something like that. That was all starting to brew. And it wasn't just in the school that these rumors were spreading. They were also spreading online. This case got a lot of online attention. There's a lot of people that are interested in this case, understandably because it's wild. But even back then when she was just missing, people were speculating maybe she was abducted. Maybe she was brought into human trafficking, something like that. The police were definitely starting to have their suspicions about Shelia and Rachel. On September 3rd, warrants were issued to seize all of the electronic devices and communications of Shelia and Rachel. The police started feeling really confident that they were on the right track, that Shelia and Rachel knew something. Maybe there really was some type of accident, and they didn't want to get in trouble, or they were covering for Skylar in some way. They just got the sense that they knew something. And they clued in Dave and Mary into this a little bit. But they advised them, don't tell Rachel and Shelia. Obviously don't compromise the case. This isn't a for sure thing. This is just what we're thinking. We're feeling it out. Then on October 2nd, 2012, Shelia posted a picture of her and Skylar on the Team Skylar Facebook page that was created, and she said, "Skylar, sorry, I haven't posted in a while. School has been taking up all my time. Me and Rachel miss you so much, especially at lunch. We sit at the lunch table alone. Come back so we don't look like loners anymore, LOL. School is so hard without you. Actually, everything is hard without you. I seriously think about you 24/7, and I miss talking to you on the phone day and night." I know you wouldn't like some of the things that are being said lately. Shelia and Rachel were definitely starting to feel the heat, and the amount of people that thought that they had done something was starting to increase over time. Eventually, things on Twitter got pretty tense. 2 anonymous Twitter accounts were created, and they both started following Rachel and Shelia, and they started harassing them and posting these really cryptic messages to them. The first one said, Luke 12 verse 2. "Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed or hidden that will not be known. Being pretty little liars down together. Hashtag promise to never leave you cold. What you going to do? What you going to do when they come for you?" Shelia actually responded and said, "No one on this earth, you can handle me and Rachel. If you think you can, you're wrong." Others were not sure why it took so long for them to realize this, but when they started reviewing the security footage again, police realized that Shelia had never picked up Skylar at 11 p.m. The police tried to pull security footage from other places that Shelia said that they had went over that hour when they had picked her up. And once they saw footage from a convenience store where they were at, they realized that the car that had picked Skylar up at 12:30 was actually Sheila's Toyota Camry. Now the police know that Shelia and Rachel were lying. They couldn't figure out why. They actually created a persona online and posed as someone just attending the high school so that they could keep tabs on what the girls were posting. And he read through thousands of posts on Facebook and Twitter, constantly having to search the internet to decode the hashtags they were using and the shorthand that they were using. And he said that it didn't take long for him to become incredibly suspicious of Shelia. She was tweeting all this stuff about getting drunk, about skipping school, and about partying. She had tons of tweets about that, but then she randomly would have one and they're like, "I miss you, Skylar, please come back home." However, the police kept bringing Shelia and Rachel in. Kept asking them questions, trying to get a real read on them, but their story never changed. They were very much in sync about what they said was happening that night. And they noticed that the two girls were very different. Rachel seemed very nervous, very reserved while she was being interviewed. But Shelia was very cheerful, very upbeat, very confident. And according to the investigators, it seemed like she was flirting with some of them at one point. Shelia seemed to want to stay as close to the investigation as possible. She was always asking for them to keep her updated for any new information, constantly saying how she wishes she knew more information. However, Rachel took the opposite approach. She really just stayed away from the whole thing and seemed nervous about it. She also kept her distance from Mary and Dave, which was very different from the approach that Shelia was taking. She was constantly talking to Mary and Dave, constantly using them as support. They were supporting her. Like Dave and Mary said, she always was part of the family because she had been Skylar's friend for years. Police were starting to get a little closer to the truth in the winter of 2012. Using other security camera footage from various locations, they were able to piece together the fact that the girls had driven to Blacksville the night that Skylar disappeared, which Rachel and Shelia had both originally denied. But their phone records showed that the girls were texting Skylar when they claimed that she was with them, which makes no sense. And at this point, police are also throwing around the idea that maybe the night that Skylar went missing, that the girls were doing some type of drug. Maybe Skylar really did overdose, and Rachel and Shelia just left her somewhere. And this started to make a lot of sense because every time that they would interview Rachel, she seemed really nervous, like she didn't want to get in trouble. And like I said, they were really sticking to their same stories. The two of them were very much on the same page about what happened that night until one interview where Rachel told them something completely different. She claimed that Skylar had run off into the woods that night. She said that she and Shelia tried to run after her, tried to find her, but she was gone. So obviously, this is a huge change from her original story. After hearing this, the police immediately call Shelia in and see if she has the same story, and of course, now she does. It is very obvious that the two of them are communicating and planning out what they're going to tell the police. By December, the police decided they need to give both of these girls a polygraph test and see if they can get something out of that. Now Shelia was a hard fail on the polygraph test, definitely was being deceitful. Then it was time for Rachel to take her test. And on the way, her father is bringing her there, and they're going to her lawyers because she's going to meet up with him before the polygraph. And on the way there, she jumps out of the car and runs to Sheila's house to get help from Tara, Sheila's mom. Now, apparently Sheila's mom had been really trying to slow down the investigation. She got in a fight with one of the investigators, Jessica. Jessica was actually taken off of the case because she called Tara a tool. Now it is all really starting to paint a picture here. They're really starting to put the pieces together of what may have happened, and they're definitely thinking at this point something happened. The girls don't want to admit it. There was an overdose. She drank too much. Something happened, and it was an accident, and the girls are covering up for it. On December 16, 2012, Mary wrote a very long Facebook message about Skylar's disappearance, and in the post, she talked about how Rachel and Shelia had lied, and she also implied in the message that Skylar was most likely dead. It was clear how they were starting to feel. They definitely had turned on Rachel and Shelia at this point and felt like they had to be involved. And once this happened, imagine how many rumors and stuff is going to get stirred up from a mother making a huge post like this. People were really starting to turn on Rachel and Shelia. All this pressure was having a major mental toll on Rachel, not so much Shelia. She just didn't seem to care much, but Rachel was really struggling mentally from all of this pressure and scrutiny. Rachel's parents were really worried about their daughter's mental health. They wanted her to distance as much as she could from Shelia. They felt like she was this terrible influence on her and that she was making her more stressed out, giving her really bad anxiety, and they also didn't like Tara, Sheila's mom. They just felt like she was bad news as well. And this is really interesting, but Rachel's parents, even though they were divorced, they ended up moving back in together for Rachel's sake because Rachel's father lived too close to Shelia. That's how concerned that they were. They were willing to move back in together, even though they were divorced. All this just tells you how seriously they are starting to see their daughter decline. She is stressing out. She is carrying major anxiety. And I think in their minds, they're probably starting to figure out that something went wrong with Skylar. That she must know more. The strange part is when her parents made that decision to move back in together, they didn't tell Rachel they were going to do it, which is pretty shocking when your parents have been divorced for a while for your dad to suddenly move back into the house. That's just stressful on its own. Rachel just came home one day and found out that her dad was living there now, so that really upset her. She was so upset, actually, that as soon as she realized that he was living in the house, she started running around the neighborhood, screaming and crying. Her parents chased her around the neighborhood. They finally got her inside and they got her into her room and locked her in there. Her mom called the police and you can actually hear Rachel in the background of the call screaming. Her dad had to restrain her because she was freaking out. And she started threatening to kill herself. Rachel ended up being taken to Chestnut Ridge, which is a psychiatric facility in Morgantown, West Virginia. And Shelia actually did try to go see Rachel several times. She wanted to talk to her, but the staff had been ordered to not let Shelia in, so she was never able to talk with her during this time. And who knows what they wanted to talk about. Rachel was released 5 days later, and as soon as she was released, her parents took her right to their lawyer's office. And there, she finally met up with the officers and took her polygraph test. And after seeing Rachel's demeanor after all this, how burnt out she was, the police felt like they were going to get the truth from her. They felt like guilt had just broken her down. They were going to find out that Skylar had overdosed and they hid it. There was something like that going on. The interviewing her started, thinking this is going to last a while and going to be difficult to get the full story out of her. But only a few questions in, Rachel shocked them all by saying, "We stabbed her." That's right. Rachel and Shelia stabbed Skylar Neese to death. As you can imagine, the investigators' jaws just dropped. This was not even something they were considering. They were thinking this was a cover-up for an accident. Now they're dealing with murder, and then she just starts to spill everything. She told them how Skylar and Shelia usually spent their spring break together, and that their sophomore year, they spent a week in Myrtle Beach. But according to Rachel, on this trip, the girls had fought the entire time. And when she got back, Shelia complained to Rachel about how bad Skylar was, how much she didn't like her anymore, and how she had to go. At one point, there were some teachers and classmates that overheard Rachel and Shelia talking about how to get rid of a dead body. However, a few weeks before this, a dead body was found near their school, and the teachers assumed that they were talking about that. But of course, other kids in the school who had heard that assumed that they were talking about killing Skylar. And it turns out that some of those kids even told Skylar what they heard, but she dismissed it. She thought, Rachel and Shelia would never do anything to harm me. And she kept hanging out with them all that final spring semester leading up to summer. But obviously as summer came, Skylar was starting to catch on to the attitude Rachel and Shelia had towards her. Back on June 4th and 5th, she made a few tweets such as, "Sick of being at home. Thanks, friends. Love hanging out with you too. You are doing stuff like this is why I can never completely trust you. It really doesn't take much to piss me off." And Shelia, on the 4th and the 5th, did not tweet at all, which was pretty unusual for her. After all, Shelia was the most active on her Twitter. When they looked back at message, they saw that on July 5th, Rachel and Shelia had texted Skylar, asking her to sneak out with them that night. And at first, Skylar wasn't so sure. It actually took her a little while to agree to join them. Shelia was the one driving the Toyota Camry that picked her up that night, and that Rachel was sitting in the passenger seat. Skylar got picked up around 12:30. She gets in the back of the car. And of course, the girls didn't realize that there was surveillance video, so they didn't think that out too well. But they drove downward toward Blacksville in Magnolia County, right on the Pennsylvania border, which is 25 minutes away from Star City. Their plan was originally to take Route 19 to Route 7 to get to Blacksville, but Shelia ended up changing their course when she saw a state police car parked at an intersection. But eventually, they did get into Blacksville. They crossed into Pennsylvania, and then Shelia drove them down this dark winding road, to the middle of nowhere. It was just secluded, and they would come here to smoke weed with Skylar. This wasn't unusual to Skylar at all. According to Rachel, they talked for a few minutes in the car, and then they got out. And when they got to their normal smoking spot, Skylar realized that she had left the lighter in the car. Skylar turned around toward the car to get it and started walking that way when suddenly, Shelia and Rachel counted out, 1, 2, 3, and on 3, both girls pulled out kitchen knives that they had taken from their parents' house and started stabbing Skylar. Skylar started screaming. She had been stabbed in the knee, and she tried to run, but she couldn't. According to Rachel, she fell backwards and then Rachel stopped stabbing her, but Shelia just kept going. The girls just let her slowly bleed out in front of them. They literally stood back, the two of them, and watched her slowly die. And according to Rachel, all Skylar could say before she died was, "Why?" They waited until Skylar had died and it became completely silent. It turns out Rachel and Shelia had stabbed Skylar over 50 times, and Rachel talked about how much they had premeditated this. They had packed up all the gear that they would need in their car, including paper towels, rags, bleach, clean clothes, even a shovel, and they had all of this in the trunk of their car. The girls' next move was to get that shovel and try to dig a hole so that they could bury her out there. But as they started to dig, they realized the ground was too hard and rocky, and they could not make a hole. Instead of burying her, they dragged her body over under this tree and just covered her with dirt and debris and branches and just random things that they found. And this is a strange move, but after that, they just turned off Skylar's cell phone and left it next to her body. After this, they washed themselves off at the creek, and then they walked back to their car where they had a fresh change of clothes, got in the car like everything was normal, and went home. On their way home, they dumped off all the rags, all the evidence that they had, and they got back to their houses around 6 a.m. Shelia hops on her Twitter and says this, "Always keep your cool." So of course, after Rachel just tells them all this, the officers are completely shocked. So of course they asked her, "Why? Why did you guys do this?" They literally said that they did it because they didn't like her. They said they didn't want to be friends with her anymore, and this was the only way to get rid of her. Rachel claimed that it was as simple as that. The police, they don't even know where to start. They don't even have a body, so the first thing they're asking is, "Do you guys remember where you put her body? Can you lead us to it?" And Rachel agreed, so they went out there to where she thought they had dumped the body, but the area had been completely covered by snow, and Rachel couldn't remember exactly where they put the body, so they had to wait until all of it melted. On January 4, 2013, the police got a warrant to seize every knife inside of Sheila's house. Not only that, they looked in her car and they found blood in her trunk. And while this was all going on, Shelia didn't know that Rachel had confessed, but she was already starting to figure it out just by the way they were acting and the evidence that they were pulling. She was a pretty smart girl, and she caught on pretty quick that their ship was sinking. But they wanted to get more out of Shelia while she was still in the stage of lying to the police. The police had Rachel wear a recording device, a listening device, and go and hang out with Shelia and see what she could get out of her. However, Rachel got very nervous. They ended up not talking about Skylar at all. They took a selfie together though, so that's great. Now at this point, Mary and Dave know that the police are onto the girls, but they don't know the latest development from Rachel yet. They're still hopeful that maybe there's a chance that Skylar's out there. Her whole family is just so broken-hearted. They're putting up flyers everywhere they can, begging people for leads, just hoping that maybe Skylar would come home. But just after the snow melted in the area, police were able to search that wooded area that Rachel had told them about. Of course, they did test to make sure that this was really Skylar, but this was indeed Skylar's body. She was just left out there on the ground by her friends. The rest of the winter and spring, the police made Rachel and Shelia get homeschooled. So, they never saw each other. On February 10, 2013, Skylar's birthday, Rachel made a happy birthday Twitter post to Skylar, and then after that, she tweeted, "I hate the stuff I think about at night." On March 13, they announced the public in a press release that the body had been found in Pennsylvania, and the public was just devastated because people were really invested in this case. People were just really hoping that she would be found, that there would be a better outcome, especially kids at the school. Kids at the high school finding out were so upset. They had to bring in counselors and make sure everyone was doing okay, because it's hard when one of your fellow classmates dies, especially in such a brutal way. And when other classmates are suspected of being involved, it definitely makes it all more chaotic. Now it was official. Skylar wasn't missing. She was murdered. The girls are still technically under investigation. Even though this confession has been brought forward, they have to confirm everything. People in the community were already suspicious that Rachel and Shelia had something to do with her death. Shelia was still trying to publicly maintain her innocence. On her birthday, She also made a message to Skylar and said, "Rest easy, Skylar. You'll always be my best friend. I miss you more than you could ever know." Shelia tweeted, "Worst day of my whole life." And Rachel was still doing this too. Even though she knows that she just confessed to the police that she stabbed Skylar, she still had the nerve to write, "Rest in peace, baby. I love and miss you more than anything. May you finally have justice." Then on April 1, 2013, a month before she was arrested, Shelia seemed to confess to her crime through Twitter. At 1:37 in the morning on April 1, Shelia tweeted, "We really did go on 3." The next afternoon, she tweeted again, saying, "They say you remember the past better than it really was." After the police did this bit of an undercover investigation with Rachel, she obviously has to turn herself in eventually. Rachel turned herself in on May 1, 2013 and pled guilty to second-degree murder. She was transferred from juvenile to adult status and officially pleaded to murder in the second degree, unlawfully, feloniously, willfully, maliciously, and intentionally causing the death of Skylar Neese by stabbing her and causing fatal injuries. And the state of West Virginia recommended a sentence of 20 years for her. Meanwhile, they got the results back from Sheila's car. That the blood in there did belong to Skylar Neese, so that officially ties her to the case. On the day that Shelia got arrested, she was actually just chilling at the Cracker Barrel with her mom, Tara. The police showed up at the restaurant, waited for them to come out, and as soon as they did, they approached Tara and Shelia in the parking lot, and she acted completely shocked, very upset, and they arrested her for first-degree murder. Shelia actually asked her mom, "Mom, is it going to be okay?" And her mom said, "I don't know." Now Shelia definitely did not realize the weight of what was really going to happen to her. Shelia was charged with murder, and they decided that they're going to try her as an adult. Now, the media had been covering the story all along. The public was very interested. Dave and Mary were doing as much press as they could, but once the arrests happened, the coverage just boomed. It was non-stop. It was even covered on CNN by Anderson Cooper. 16-year-old Rachel Schoaf had been charged with first-degree murder, but after leading authorities to Skylar's body in the woods, she cut a plea deal. She pled guilty earlier this month to second-degree murder, but she still could get 40 years in prison. Now the other girl, the other suspect who hasn't been named, she is still charged as a juvenile with first-degree murder, although a judge could charge her as an adult. We're waiting on that decision. There is no word that a plea deal is in the works for her. Now, Shelia had already been tried as an adult, so her name was released to the public, but Shelia was being held as a juvenile at this point, therefore, her name was not yet released. But of course, people in the school and community knew that once Rachel was arrested, that Shelia was probably involved too. People put the pieces together extremely quick. Shelia was indicted by a grand jury in West Virginia with 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. And as soon as she was charged as an adult, her name was released to the public, and people went wild online. The trial started on October 22, 2013, and Rachel's defense attorney actually asked for her testimony to be suppressed because she had a lot of mental health issues going on. They also asked the judge for the trial to be postponed, and they did agree to that, so it was rescheduled for January 28, 2014. After realizing that there was no hope for her to get off for this, she ended up deciding to take a plea deal instead. And in return for this, the state of Pennsylvania agreed to not press additional charges on top of what she already had. On January 24, 2014, Shelia did plead guilty to first-degree murder. Her lawyer later stated, "I looked at everything, and I couldn't find any reasonable explanation for her actions. There was really nothing to defend. This was clearly premeditated." The two girls had talked about this. They thought about it for months. They had all the supplies ready to go, so there was nothing to be said. This is a clear premeditated first-degree murder, period. So finally, 18 months after she murdered Skylar Neese in cold blood, Shelia was sentenced to life in prison but with mercy, which means that she will be up for parole in 15 years. Shelia never expressed any remorse, never said sorry to the family. In fact, she seemed more distracted in court with how she looked. She was wearing makeup, and her hair was done up a certain way. Rachel, on the other hand, in her trial and sentencing, looked very disheveled, very depressed. Clearly, the gravity of everything had hit her. The next month, Rachel was sentenced as well and got 30 years in prison because it was mostly Shelia that initiated the crime once they looked more into everything. It was really Shelia leading the charge, but that was very controversial as well. A lot of people think she should have gotten more time, and she would also be eligible for parole after serving only 10 years. Now Rachel, on the other hand, did apologize to the family in court. I would like to hear your thoughts on this case. If you enjoyed this case, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And I will make sure to do some more similar solved cases in the future. Thanks again, be safe, and please subscribe.